Idaho death row inmate Thomas Creech's execution is moving forward.
We're at the People's House of Idaho, and the power of government to take a human life is the one thing that none of us here want to give the government.
So many faith organizations, civil rights organizations, and individual Idahoans are here standing in opposition to this execution.
Life is not ours to take or to end.
We stand here once again to protest the action of the state and its use of the barbaric system of the death penalty.
We're now in the Idaho State Capitol. We're going to go into the governor's office, ask to be heard, and share our petition and our demand that they halt this execution.
It's just amazing the number of people that have come out in support at various churches and elsewhere. We hope to have a really good turnout tomorrow to our last chance to oppose the execution of Thomas Creech.
I'm a clergy in the United Methodist Church, and this morning I'm gathered with a group of clergy and laity to protest the execution of Thomas Creech.
This didn't solve anything. This didn't help anything. Just thinking today of all the victims and just praying for the whole process.
First, I'd like to express my deep gratitude for Abe and Suzanne for coming out and organizing us and helping us to get our heads around what this means in our society and in our community.
So death penalty action comes wherever we need to go to support local abolitionists who want to stand up and lift their voices to oppose executions. It's an honor for us to have groups like the ACLU and the United Methodist Church and others ask us to come and help them. And that's what we do. We help lift up the voices of people who want to say no to executions.
Apologies if that video is a little, if it was stopping. My
Liberty Mutual customized my car insurance, so I saved hundreds.
Kind of spotty, but I just wanted to play that Idaho video to get us centered, because we have another execution coming up in Idaho in just a couple of weeks. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. Is he here? Yes, he is. There we go.
Okay, sorry, it looked like I was stuck. I'm just first and foremost thankful for everybody's presence here tonight. I'm looking around and seeing all different types of folks who are in all different types of places, who have all different kinds of capabilities. And it is an amazing thing to gather together, not just for vigils and not just in response to things, but also to gather at the beginning of the month as a proactive measure to talk about what is going on, to talk about different states, to talk about upcoming executions, and to talk about what we can do and what we can encourage other people to do and how we can push. I very quickly wanted to congratulate my dear friend, Allie Sullivan, because it was 2 years ago today that Allie and I came up with this idea of even doing a forecast every month. And so I wanted to honor my compatriot, my comrade, in doing all this. Thank you, Allie, for all that you do and who you are. But again, as we continue on, South Carolina, Idaho, Alabama, Hillary, I think I just saw your cat. I am, and also federal executions. I want us to just remain in sort of a prayerful space of what is God, what is love, what is the divine, what is hope, what is justice, what is mercy leading us to do. May we be active listeners tonight. Amen. Allie?
So originally I was thinking we would start with Alabama because we are joined by Carrie Grayson's attorney. However, I just saw Hillary pop up. So I think it's probably best if we start with South Carolina because South Carolina is the first execution coming up this month. Unfortunately, we are expecting Richard Moore's execution, or we're preparing for it on November 1st. And so I wanted to give Hillary a moment to talk about Richard, his case, and kind of what's been going on with you guys in South Carolina.
Thank you, Allie, and thanks everybody here affiliated with the forecast tonight. I know some of y'all are supporters of SCADP in addition to being supporters of Death Penalty Action and many other groups. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Reverend Hillary Taylor. I am the Executive Director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. You're seeing me a little bit more informally tonight. It has been a long couple of weeks. We are finishing up our Journey of Hope speaking series here in South Carolina. We have been calling it the Palmetto Journey of Hope. So for the last 3 years, we have been increasing different speaking events through our partnership with Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. So we have spoken to over 300 people across the month of October, where there are all kinds of efforts underway. October 10th is obviously World Day Against the Death Penalty, and that kicked off a lot of our events this month. We are essentially culminating the speaking events with the clemency efforts for Richard Moore. For those of you who are not connected to last month's forecast, here's a little bit about Richard Moore's case. Richard Moore walked into a convenience store in Spartanburg County, and he got into an argument with the store clerk, James Mahoney. James Mahoney pulled 2 guns on Richard. Richard pulled one of the guns out of James Mahoney's hands. When James Mahoney pulled the second gun, the 2 shot each other, and James Mahoney died from his wounds. This would not be a death penalty eligible offense, except for the fact that Richard Moore is a Black man. James Mahoney was a white man, a white murder victim. And this is a horrific, awful, accident that should have never happened. And Richard Moore is also the last person in South Carolina's death row to be sentenced by an all-white jury. This was in the 2000s. The crime happened in 1999. So this is not the 1940s, not the 1950s, not the 1960s when we think of these things happening. This is the 2000s, which is many of us were born, well before that, but there are few folks here who, this is certainly within their lifetimes, or, it's just abhorrent, right? It speaks to the racism of the death penalty, the arbitrariness of the death penalty. The final piece of Richard Moore's case is that his case became a political football between 2 primary candidates for Spartanburg County's lead prosecutor, which we call the solicitor here in South Carolina. So the incumbent solicitor of the Republican Party, Holman Gossett, who is now dead, had a long history of trying the death penalty for people who have white victims. And his challenger, Trey Gowdy, of Benghazi investigation fame about 10 years ago, Trey Gowdy won that primary for Spartanburg County solicitor. And as a kind of parting favor, quote unquote, to Trey Gowdy, Holman Gossett decided to seek the death penalty so that if Trey Gowdy decided to drop the charges and seek any alternative prison sentence for Richard, he would look soft on crime and therefore be at risk of losing the election. So the death penalty essentially has been used as a way for Trey Gowdy to maintain his political power. He owes a lot of his career to seeking the death penalty for Richard Moore's case. He later goes on to be a very prominent U.S. congressman. He's now no longer in Congress, but he has refused to intercede on Richard's behalf. which is really unfortunate because there are all kinds of people who are supporting his clemency effort, including a former South Carolina Department of Corrections head named John Osment. John Osment has videos that we have been sharing saying that he believes Richard would be a force for good. Richard is not the same person he was 20 plus years ago. And Richard has actually been able to be a father and a grandfather, a present one. You know, lots of people have relatives outside of prison, but he was able to parent his children, and one might say successfully parent his children. His daughter is now somebody who works in our armed forces. She's a part of the Air Force. His son graduated as valedictorian from his high school and went to University of Pennsylvania and is a working, successful adult in Detroit. He has 2 grandchildren, and he has a very vibrant community of people that he supports and loves. And John Osment, the former DOC head here, is somebody who is for the death penalty. So it really speaks volumes that somebody who's for the death penalty in general is advocating for Richard's clemency, advocating for a reduced sentence from death to life. Ali has posted all of our things that we have as far as our petition. We have been doing a lot of different press and media presence kinds of things, again, partially through the Palmetto Journey of Hope. We had a rally yesterday, which had about 40 people, kind of all in all, which was pretty great, considering that it was a last minute rally and considering that we were battling, you know, like the USC marching band, which was around another part of the state capitol at the time that we were also holding this rally. This week, we are doing a number of things. If you're interested in attending the last few events of our Palmetto Journey of Hope, we're going to be in Denmark, South Carolina at Voorhees University, where Suzanne Bossler, who is part of Journey to Hope from Violence to Healing, will be preaching as a guest chapel speaker. We will be at Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina, and I believe one other event. We are going to be having some vigils both on Thursday and Friday of this week. Thursday night in Columbia, South Carolina, we will be having a restoring vigil of Richard Moore. One of his chaplain associates is going to be sharing pieces of Richard's story, not just the things that we are telling to restory the incident that landed him on death row, and not just, you know, things that the media has been talking about, but what is Richard in his kind of everyday life, the things that we, you know, just are not able to share as we do our advocacy work. On Friday, we will have a vigil in the upstate, likely in Greenville. I will be confirming the location tomorrow. We'll be having a vigil at Broad River Correctional Institution outside of death row, starting at 4:30 on Friday. And then we'll be having another vigil at 5:30 p.m. also on Friday at Cokesbury United Methodist Church in North Charleston. So that will be kind of the Low Country area. Those are all of the things. The final thing is we will be having a petition delivery. SCADP has a petition. We know that DPA has been also doing its own petition signature collecting. So we will be presenting that on y'all's behalf. We will also be presenting another petition that a fellow activist has created with tens of thousands of signatures. So this is a lot of people who are advocating for Richard Moore's clemency. In truth, Richard Moore's case is probably the most sympathetic that we have, again, because it's easy to see the politicalization that occurred, the racism that occurred, the Batson violation that is present. And the fact that, you know, if this was a white man, like this would have been branded as a self-defense case, and not as a malicious murder, which is not what it was. And again, Richard is somebody who is repentant. Richard is somebody who has said, okay, let me remake, you know, my life, you know, out of the ashes and the rubble that it has become on death row. And he is somebody who shows that we are more than the worst thing we've ever done. We are more than the worst thing that's ever happened to us. Nobody's beyond redemption, and the worst thing is not the last thing. And we believe that Richard would be a much better asset if clemency was granted, if his sentence was reduced from death to life. We believe that he can be part of solving the problem of violence here in South Carolina.
Hillary, I wanted to jump in really quick. First of all, first and foremost, thank you so much for your leadership there in South Carolina. Uh, it's hard to believe that it was only a few years ago that SCADP wasn't even going, and now it feels like it's blowing and going in every direction. So thank you. I wanted to quickly just sort of point out something that I've thought about with Richard's case, and it reminds me a lot. It's not the same, not exactly the same, obviously, but it reminds me a lot of Emmanuel Littlejohn, uh, and a very similar era where uh, this sort of like super predator mentality of if a black man kills a white man in the commissioning of some sort of crime or some sort of unfortunate circumstance, then all of a sudden, not just that they're guilty, but they have to be destroyed. And I guess the question that I have, just in terms of y'all's work right now, is I expected in Oklahoma to a lot of the crowd, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth crowd, the folks who really want to keep this if you intentionally do this or if you do this, then you deserve this. I thought that we were going to get some level of questions or at least conversation. Um, but it seemed like people were just hungry to kill and they just didn't want to be bothered with it. Have y'all felt like you have gotten any sort of made any sort of headway in terms of those types of conversations, helping people sort of break down that this isn't your typical death penalty case? Not that there is a case in which we promote the death penalty, but that this is something different. Have you been able to engage folks in that conversation?
I think we are starting to see some cracks in a lot of different places. One of the things that I shared in a newsletter email this week was that somebody contacted me who is former law enforcement and somebody who was working two cases that were going to be, were likely going to be pursued for capital punishment. They were not for different reasons. And also this person had been involved in other kinds of incidents where, there had been a kind of shooting civilian incident, the details of which are I will not go into. But he mentioned that, he used to be for the death penalty. And through his different experiences, he has realized that death doesn't bring closure. It doesn't bring healing. It just adds to the pain of the world. And so what we are seeing is people who are less afraid to share what their opinions are, who feel less siloed, and who are starting to come out and say, I want to be connected in this way. We are also seeing folks who have been very deeply involved in the pro-life movement, who, again, that is usually affiliated or associated with more politically conservative folks. And a lot of these folks are saying, I'm tired of the hypocrisy of only caring about abortion, and I really want to make sure that human flourishing is possible at all levels of life. And we can't just, say that we care about, certain lives, for different reasons, but not all lives, right? If all lives matter, then the circumstances of how different people get into places, that also matters. And that also is worth solving. It's also really interesting because when our most recent execution happened, the execution of Khalil Allah, one of the reasons that I believe, and I'm not the only one who believes this, but one of the reasons that we believe that Khalil was chosen as the first person to be executed was that he was not very sympathetic. His case was very, very, very difficult to advocate for different reasons. And I mean, this is the reality of this work, right? In a lot of ways, we don't have the moral high ground necessarily, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do this. I think is even more important that we do this work for folks who, again, because of the violence they've experienced and the neglect they've experienced, the only option in some ways is that they transform, or they transform the hurt that they themselves have experienced, instead of transforming it, because there haven't really been a lot of options for them to learn how to transform what they've experienced. But something that was really significant to me is that for the 45 or so anti-death penalty protesters that were outside of Broad River Correctional, there was not one single pro-death penalty protester. I think that that's extremely significant. I think that that's extremely important to pay attention to. And it means that the death penalty is really just being kept in place by people who just couldn't be bothered to change the law. And maybe they have a set kind of, philosophy or theology that says, no, this is what I believe. But I believe that that is a very passive thing. I think we just need to remind people who feel very siloed in their opinions around the death penalty and being against the death penalty that they're not alone. And then it's not just one type of person who's against the death penalty. There are all kinds of people who are against the death penalty, right? People who are really skeptical about our criminal legal system, right? If we don't trust the government to pave our roads well or deliver our mail on time, then, why would we leave any other system, including our judicial system, free of any kind of accountability or safeguards? Those are things that we all need to remember, is that our systems are not perfect. They're far from perfect, right? And some people intentionally do the wrong thing. Here in South Carolina, one of the things we're going to be working on are mitigating the chance of wrongful convictions. So we are looking at ways to pass legislation that can actually chip away at the death penalty, beginning first with innocence cases. Everybody loves an innocence case. But there are people who are on death row right now who have legitimate innocence claims. And Khalil Allah also had a legitimate innocence claim for the murder of Irene Graves, which is what got him the death penalty. So that's a longer answer to the question that you have, Jeff, and we have a lot more work to do. This is work that obviously moves at the speed of relationship. Because we have so many executions, we don't really have time to do that, but ultimately, this is how we're going to win. We are building relationships right now that will lead us to eradicating the death penalty in South Carolina. And I believe that, I know it will happen here. I know it will.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. Proud of you, proud of y'all's work.
Thank you.
Hillary, I just wanted to be mindful of, I will unspotlight you. I just wanted to be mindful of Casey's time. She's joining us from Alabama. She is Carrie Grayson's attorney. So I just wanted to give you the floor, Casey, to talk about this case, talk about what's going on, and yeah, go for it.
Oh, well, thank you. I actually want to piggyback off what Reverend Taylor said there a little bit at the end of this kind of assurance or this idea that things, if we cannot trust our government to do kind of these basic things, why don't we question more when we are looking to them to journey through the criminal justice process, but also to do this most to take a word from the Attorney General here in Alabama, this most solemn duty of taking a life. How can we trust the government to do this without a more heightened level of accountability in this space? And I think that is something that Mr. Grayson's case raises in my mind is the hypocrisy of this system in such a significant way. Carrie Grayson was a teenager when he committed the crime that he is on death row for and that he is set to be executed for in November. He and 3 other teenagers committed this awful offense, and it is an awful crime that took the life of Miss Vicky DeBlube. back in 1994. But Kerry Grayson is the only one of those 4 teenage boys that is going to be executed for that murder, for a number of reasons. Out of the 4 of them, one of the young men got a life sentence at the very beginning because of his age. During the other 3 all received death sentences. 2 of them received Roper relief, which because they were under the age of 18 at the time of their crime in 2005, the Supreme Court decided that they were not eligible for the death penalty because of their young age. And so those individuals immediately were taken and given life without parole. Since that time, the Supreme Court decided another case, and now one of those individuals is actually eligible for parole. I say all that partially because during the Roper case, the Alabama Attorney General argued that it would be nonsensical to allow capital punishment for Kerry Grayson, but not for Mr. Loggins and Mr. Duncan, who were plainly every bit as culpable, if not more so, in this case. And that is literally the words of the Alabama Attorney General. In that same instance, the prosecutors in Mr. Grayson's case argued at his trial that he was the ringleader in his case. But in that same prosecutor, in each one of the co-defendants' cases argued, and one of them referred to Mr. Loggins as the leader, that he was up front driving the whole thing, referred to one of the other individuals at his trial. He argued that it was ludicrous to insinuate that Kerry Grayson was the major player. In fact, that that the only evidence was that Kerry was driving the car, that clearly the 2 other individuals were the ringleaders, that Kerry had no other involvement other than driving the car. In the third co-defendant's trial, it was some kind of illusion to suggest that Kerry had been the leader, and in fact, it was Mr. Duncan who did everything. And so that's the prosecutor. And then when Mr. Grayson was trying to get his lawyer at trial asked to get the transcripts from those co-defendant trials, the courts would not allow him to get them as someone who did not have money and who was just assigned an attorney because he could not afford one. The courts would not allow him money to get those transcripts. So he went to trial with no idea that any of those things had been said at any of those other trials. They would not pay for his attorneys to be able to go sit in at any of those other trials to sit and listen. And shame on those attorneys for not even bothering to have a teenager go sit and damn watch a trial or anything. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that the trial lawyers failed in those instances, but the fact of the matter is that the courts and the state had responsibilities there, and they failed across the board in those spaces. But the absolute hypocrisy that the state pushed these things and created these narratives, and at the end of the day, the person who they said at 3 separate trials that it was ludicrous to suggest that he was a ringleader or up front in any shape, form, or fashion, and that in fact in a U.S. Supreme Court pleading said it was nonsensical that that he should get the death penalty if the other 2 were not going to get the death penalty. And he is now going to be the only person executed for this offense in this space. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't believe that anyone should be in that space. But the fact that this man who has now spent over 30 years on death row for a horrible, horrible mistake that happened when he was a teenager, is the ultimate hypocrisy and the evil of a system that creates a one level of justice if you are poor versus a different level of justice if you have money. And that is the system that Kerry Grayson was held under and has been held under the entire time that he has been in the system. I think that is a piece of Kerry's case that is incredibly frustrating to me from jump in this space, beyond the fact that when you look at Kerry's personal history and the fact that throughout his young life and what we now know about brain science and maturity levels, all of the things that made it unconstitutional and wrong to hold people under the age of 18 to certain levels of culpability, hold true for people that are over 18. A 19-year-old is at the same level as a 17-year-old in terms of brain levels and maturity levels and all of those things. But particularly when you take into account Kerry's particular personal background, his own struggles with mental illness, those things, I think it becomes particularly heartbreaking to me in a number of ways. The other piece I think that I hope people really see, feel, and understand is that Kerry Grayson is someone who has been on death row since he was a teenager. He is now a 50-year-old man. He is clearly not the same person that went to prison over 30 years ago. He is an incredibly bright and creative individual. He is an artist. He has created many amazing works. If you are in Alabama at any time over the next year or so, there is an amazing traveling art exhibit called The Art of Resistance that has shown up in several museums around the state. And Kerry's art is featured in it. I highly recommend it. And I think it's an amazing, beautiful piece of his that is going to live on in his space. He is a wonderful friend. I have been Kerry's lawyer now for 17 years. And he is definitely a friend and feels a lot more like family at this point. He does not have a lot of family support. And so he definitely considers our office and the folks that he has come to know his chosen family in that space. So as we move closer and closer to November 21st, there is a big hole that will be left in our office if that happens. I think the other piece in terms of forecasting and looking ahead, obviously, November 21st, if Kerry is executed, would be the 6th execution in Alabama this year, which would be the 3rd time that high of a number has been, that high of a number has been reached in Alabama executions in the modern era of the death penalty. This would be also the 3rd nitrogen death in Alabama this year. So our current push, we have a current pending litigation in regard to method of execution. And that is moving forward. We hope to be successful in that challenge, but it will not move the needle significantly because, again, it is only related to method of execution and not whether or not the execution will actually move forward, only how.
Thank you, Casey. And I just wanted to share our appreciation for your representation of Kerry. Before we let you go, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Casey. I'm sorry. I am an attorney here in Alabama. I have been doing death penalty work for in November. Literally November 11th will be I will be starting my 18th year doing death penalty work here in Alabama. And it is a gift and a privilege to be doing that work. And so that's about it for me.
Hey, Casey, can you tell us about that piece of art on the floor behind you over your shoulder, the death penalty? I love that.
Thank you. That is actually it is a piece we did for Voices for Clemency. Speaking of for World Against the Death Penalty, World Against the Death Penalty Day. One of the organizations that we support, which is our Alabama Post-Conviction Relief Project, did an event and for October 10th and had a big push there, had some really great speakers, and that was our big push. We tried to get people to take a picture with the little poster and push out like, I stand against the death penalty because but really just kind of talking about like how your voice matters in these spaces.
Casey, I wanted to jump in real quick, and then I'm going to kick it over to my friend with her hand up. Thank you, first of all. Thank you so much. And, you know, I think, you know, I've said this many times that I've worked with a lot of habeas offices all over the country doing the work that I do. And y'all are by far and away, probably going to teach some folks off, the best, my favorite. Y'all work so hard for your guys. You know, all these guys on death row talk about y'all all the time, and you know, just how much you're willing to do for them and how much you're willing to just put out for them. So anyways, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your work. I wanted to switch really quick to, as I've said many, many times on this program and on many other programs, we have with us the #1 abolitionist in the entire nation, and for that matter, the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, Esther Brown. You're muted. Esther, you're muted.
For me.
Okay. There you go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Good.
we can.
Okay. You can hear me.
Yes, you sound like God.
All right. I want to say thank you to everybody. I also want to say thank you to our federal defenders. We love them so much. And we're going to brag a little bit because Casey is on our advisory board. I too have known Carrie for a very long time, and I have quite a few pictures on my wall that he did for me for various occasions. And to me, it's just so very typical of our society. We allow people to drop through the cracks and then we punish them. Because where was our God-fearing, so wonderful society when he was a little boy, when he was living by himself and his father would stop by once a week to pay the rent? That's what he told me years ago. When he lost his mother, who also had problems, one has to say. And so he was by himself. So here's a child, experienced rejection after rejection, which I have found over the years, and I've been around the death penalty now for 40 plus years. So very often it seems to be rejection that's that starts, and then that very often seems to lead to drugs. When you get to be accepted, you want to be accepted. Well, what are the people doing who are accepted? They're doing drugs on the street. And then if you add an illness, which she's bipolar, and you mix that, and I have worked, before I was retired, I worked as a psychiatric social worker, and also in the field of drug and alcohol abuse. And I have to say that my most difficult clients were when they were duly diagnosed. But, where is this wonderful society? We don't care. No, this is certainly, this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy, and of course I have to say this year has been horrific for us on death row, because it's just death after death. We're right at this moment actually waiting for another date to be set. I don't know. I mean, it was great to hear the optimism from South Carolina. I've been in this state now for 25 years, and I can't say I'm too optimistic. And even the men, when they founded Project Hope to abolish the death penalty, which is now 35 years ago, and it was founded on death row. Yes, they gave it that name, but they all knew it wouldn't be in their lifetime. And I don't know whether it'll come in the lifetime of even the younger ones now in Alabama. I can't be optimistic about Alabama. And yes, all life is sacred. That's what our governor says. So I pass that back to her at every opportunity. But thank you all for being there, and thank you for the support. And thank you, Casey, for being a friend. And all the others who are on too, many friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I just wanted to give Chris a moment to talk. I know he emailed us and said he wanted to say some things about what's going on in Alabama right now, and particularly around the election. So I just wanted to give you the floor, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Allie. First, I have to say this case that Casey just described to us is very, very similar to my father's case. And for those who don't know me, I'm Chris Brown. My father was executed in Alabama in 2003, and I'm the newest board member of Death Penalty Action. But my father was the least culpable of three men involved in a crime, and the only one executed. The one who actually killed this victim was did 10 years and got out on parole, and the one who was the ringleader is doing a life sentence. So this is it's more common than you might think that you get this kind of a mix of outcomes and this unbalanced outcome. So the thing that I told Abe and Allie I wanted to mention is everyone's aware we have an election coming up. Death Penalty Action does not endorse any particular candidate or party. But in Alabama, where I live still, I look at my ballot for this election, and there are 26 races on it. So, but other than president, of the other 25 races that are not president, exactly 2 of them have a Democrat on the ballot. All the rest of them, there are a few that have a third-party candidate on, and I appreciate any third party that's stepping up and trying to do something. But all the rest of them almost are unopposed, and there's a slew, there's 15 or so judicial races that are unopposed. So if we step back and we think just big picture, what happens when we have essentially one party rule, when there is no effective opposition party? And in the case of all of these judicial races, except for Chief Justice, literally no opposition at all. then it's no surprise that we get the outcomes that we continue to get here in Alabama with a lot of these cases that we hear about. And as Casey said, about to be the sixth one. I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does, it would be the sixth one this year. So it's an outcome that's foreseeable because we have no opposition, because we have this strain of thought that no one's even stepping up against, and we have our judicial positions in this state are not just elected, but they are partisan elections. So we can't be surprised at the outcomes that we're getting. So what does that mean? We like to talk about what people can do. First, vote, and if you're someone like me, you start writing in all your friends and family on those dozens of blanks where there's not an opposition candidate, just as a protest. It had nothing to do even with the individual that is running, but to me, I feel I have to protest the fact that there is no actual election taking place there. Second, in Alabama, we have open primaries. You can vote. You can pick whichever party's primary ballot you'd like. And just tactically speaking, if all the races are actually on one party's primary ballot, whether you like or favor or are a member of that party or not, that's the place to do your voting in the primary. So get out and take the time to do that in the primary. But bigger picture than that is if you have any kind of influence with the other parties, there have to be candidates for there to even be a choice. And again, Death Penalty Action doesn't endorse one or the other party or a minor party, and I don't either personally. But we have this obvious problem when one party who's kind of been clear what their platform is the only one running in all these races. So it's not a surprise that we get these outcomes over and over, because that's what I see on my ballot time after time after time. And we have to start somewhere in a larger picture, somewhere with how do we get some other people involved in this? How do we encourage other people to run so there is at least some kind of choice, whether we're advocating for one or another or not, which I'm not. How do we get something so there is even another voice out there? So that's the thing that I really wanted to speak on, just that's particular to Alabama. And I'll leave it. There's some other things I could say about our some of our other boards and things going on, but I'll leave it with that for tonight. Thank you, Allie.
Chris, Abe.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. And I do want to encourage everybody to hang on, and especially our Idaho people, hang on. I know this program's been going a little bit long, and it's going to go into the next hour. But I just wanted to add that what's a little bit different about the Grayson execution, scheduled execution, is that unlike in Alan Miller's execution, the attorneys are actually challenging the use of the gas suffocation process, and we're looking at ramping up the challenges and the ask of the company that makes the mask to disavow that use. Don't forget, when we're talking about Alabama, we're also running a petition about the use of gas suffocation and also the pull back the curtains petition. So we're gathering signatures on all these. You'll be seeing these links coming out. And in addition to this, Amnesty International does not always put out a petition or an urgent action, but they're going to have one in this case. And it's probably going to go live shortly after the execution in South Carolina, if that one goes through. So watch for that after November 2nd, of course, and we'll be pushing that out as well. So just wanted to make sure you know that we are having a bit more of a concerted effort in Alabama around this execution. There was not a lot around the last, because the last person was a volunteer, and there was some respect for his choice to be made. So we didn't do a lot of raising up awareness and rather protest, but it's going to look a little bit different this time. So watch for that, and we're going to really push the opportunity for more people to be involved. And because that execution date is, that's the 21st, right? So we're going to be looking at, for Grayson, I believe the petition delivery is going to be, Esther, did we say the 19th, the Tuesday, or the?
I think we said Monday.
Monday the 18th. Thank you. Yeah, we just had a meeting about this last week. So Monday the 18th will be the petition delivery. So that'll be the day we'll be getting the word out about that. So watch for it. And again, Casey, is there anything more you want to say about the challenges on the method of execution?
We have we're doing briefing right now. We filed our brief Thursday. The state's is due Wednesday. I expect that we will probably get a ruling from the court within a week or so after that. So I think we will probably see a ruling from the district court in the next week and a half.
Good. Abe?
Yeah, I think that those are the questions. That was the main question I had, and just again, look for ramped activity there. I caught on after most of the South Carolina stuff, so I'm glad that Hillary made it again. And of course, they'll hopefully that execution won't happen, and if it does, there'll be of course, we'll be doing the live virtual vigil around all of those. But if we're ready, let's go to Idaho.
Yeah, why don't you introduce the Idaho folks, because you kind of helped resurrect or start up Idahoans against the death penalty, so I'll give you an opportunity.
Hey, Abe, 1 second, sorry. I'm just quickly bouncing back to Alabama very quickly. And Casey, I think that it seems like y'all's office has definitely understood this, and a lot of activists in Alabama have understood this. But I think when people talk about these nitrogen executions, you're not just talking about Kerry Grayson. Obviously, Kerry Grayson is very important. We're trying to save Kerry Grayson's life. But you're also talking about nitrogen around the country. Because if it becomes normal in Alabama, there's definitely a much more of a likelihood that it's going to go to other places. And so there's a lot riding on our continued and effective opposition to nitrogen executions.
Just exactly right. We are waiting for dates to be set in Louisiana, where they have allowed nitrogen. Although the intelligence that we have out of Louisiana is that they're going to continue to do lethal injections when they do resume executions. And I was just in touch with folks in Louisiana last week, and they're just, some of them, or the ones I was talking to, were puzzled that dates had not been set yet. We were able, in this current legislative session, which is soon to end, in Kansas, to stop the bill to bring gas executions there. We were able to do so in Nebraska. So thanks to the leadership of the folks on the ground in Kansas and the folks on the ground in Nebraska for that. And also in Ohio, the bill here in Ohio is still alive, but it's stalled. And the understanding that we have is that there is not an expectation that it will come up in lame duck. We'll see what happens. There's no promises on that. There never can be. What we are hoping in Ohio is what happens in lame duck. So for those who don't know that term, the period after the election, but before they start the next session, that's the lame duck period when they can do what in Ohio, we call it the Christmas tree bill. Everybody throws all their stuff on because nobody can be held accountable to it. And that's where maybe we'll get a vote on the bill to abolish the death penalty in Ohio. We'll see what happens. So with that, welcome Donna Bowe and Dave and Jan Powell with Idahoans Against the Death Penalty. And we're grateful that you're here. And let's talk about what we've got going on in Idaho.
I'm not sure who's going to be first. Maybe Jan and Dave.
Oh, Donna, go ahead.
Well,
Donna, please introduce yourself a little bit more than I did. So.
All right, I'm Donna Bowe, and I live in Pocatello, and a member of the Methodist Church here in Pocatello.
And we're Jan and Dave Powell, and we live in Eagle, Idaho. We're retired educators.
And I guess I'll just add myself in here as a person that's been helping convene all this. Donna and Dave and Jan are among several dozen people that have been that have stepped into leadership in Idaho. These people a little bit more than most, but also unavailable tonight was Reverend Karen Hernandez, who's the district person for the United Methodist Church over all the United Methodist churches in Idaho and I think Washington. But in any case, we put together a number of things. And, but before we go any further, I know, Donna, you have a personal relationship with Tom Creech, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit. I know Jeff has had some correspondence with him too, but you've had a relationship for over a decade, right?
That's right.
Maybe you can speak to your relationship with Tom and who he is as a person for a bit.
Okay, well, my husband Roger and I met Tom when back in 2011 or 12, Oregon put a moratorium on their death penalty. And our Methodist bishop presides over Oregon and Idaho. And I was in the Idaho legislature at the time and got a request from our bishop if he could come and see death row in Idaho. So I knew the director of corrections and had worked with him on a couple of committees. And so I asked him if he could arrange that. He said he could. And so I was expecting us to do as our members of our Judiciary Committee in Idaho do at the beginning of each session, is tour the prison. And when we get to death row, you walk up and down the hall, and each of the inmates are in their own cell behind a plexiglass. And there's no interaction there. It's just who it is kind of thing. But this was different. When the bishop flew in from Portland and we went out to the prison, Director Renke had arranged for us to sit at a table. There were about 6 of us there. And they brought in an inmate, Tom Creech. And we were able to have like a 30-minute conversation, question and answer kind of thing with Tom Creech. It must have blown him away because inmates don't get contact visits very often, and certainly not with 6 people at a time. But after about 30 minutes, the bishop gave a prayer, and Tom was led back to his cell, and we went to the airport so the bishop could fly back to Portland. But Roger and I kept up a relationship with Tom, either through letters. At that time, they had JPay. And when we weren't able to do that, we were able to find out his situation and his thoughts and so on through his wife, Leanne. And and when we ever had business in Boise or traveled through Boise, we made an attempt to go visit Tom. It was always behind the plexiglass window and so on, but we were able to see him in person in that way. So over the 10 years, that's been our experience. The last few years, our contact has been mostly through his wife, Leanne.
Thank you, Donna. So Jan and Dave, maybe you could share a little bit about what we've been up to. What's the committee been working on? What are we ready to roll out?
Right. Do you want me to back up to February or?
I don't think it has to be too deep, but however you want to share. What have we created in Idaho where there wasn't anything before you and a few others called and said, "Hey, come help us."
Yeah, exactly. So Mr. Creech's execution was first scheduled at the end of February of this year. And Abe and Suzanne came out and helped us with some activities in this area to raise awareness, speaking at several churches, and synagogue, and delivering petitions at the Capitol, and then the vigil outside of the prison. Then, fortunately or unfortunately, I think it's both, Mr. Creech was not executed last February. It was a total botched attempt. They tried 8 times to put lines in, and and failed or succeeded, again, depending on your point of view. Certainly suffering for him in that process. It's unnecessary. So they called it off and kind of went back to the drawing board. About 2 weeks ago, our department, Idaho Department of Corrections, announced that they had a new protocol in place that now allows them to do a cut down line if they're having difficulty putting in peripheral lines. The day after they announced that, along with some modifications to the execution rooms, day after they announced that, they announced a new execution date for Mr. Creech. So wasted no time whatsoever. So it was time to gear up again, and we had, I think, a successful Zoom call with a handful of people, and Karen just took and ran with the idea of putting together a video of leaders around our state protesting the death penalty. That was put together in 24 hours and has been pushed out to us so that we can share that with churches and organizations in our state.
Yeah, I think we have that to show. Dave, do you want to say something about that before we show the video?
Yes. When it was announced that the state of Idaho was preparing to use the lateral incision, it has been discussed that this is a surgical procedure. It involves cutting into a major artery and then inserting the needles through that artery, and that it would be overseen or performed by, and I'm quoting here, a certified physician. So several things immediately came to our mind on this, and that is, first of all, any member of the American Medical Association is forbidden to participate in executions other than certified death, I assume. And so the question I have, and I hope it's being taken up by Mr. Creech's federal public defenders, is who's going to certify? What kind of physician? What is their license? Will they lose their license if they perform this? Or will that individual be covered by the shield laws? And so to me, there's a legal question about whether or not this procedure can be used for those reasons. So, and if it doesn't work, the state of Idaho has spent over $1.3 million this year to create a room separate to the execution chamber for surgically inserting a needle in this lateral position. In addition to that, they have also, in that $1.3 million, they have also spent over $750,000 to create a firing squad chamber at the maximum security. So
that money has been earmarked, but it hasn't been built. But
oh, it hasn't?
No.
I thought that it had been built.
No, it has not been
My
built.
mistake. My mistake.
But they have started, as you point out, building a, quote, preparation room where prison staff will be trained how to administer the lethal injection, even through this cut down procedure. At the same time, once Tom Creech got the death warrant, he was moved from his cell on death row into, he calls the death house or the death cell, where he was able to observe the staff training to administer to be there and observe them training to kill you. You know, that was traumatic in its own right, but and he was there until the execution date in February. And both Tom and Leanne have suffered severe trauma since February. And Leanne says, he and I are both still suffering trauma from February 28th. It has greatly affected our cognitive abilities. We both lose our train of thought, have memory lapses, some anger issues, and so on. Our communications are constantly disrupted. The phone calls are full of distortion, and we constantly have drop calls. This is even interfering with his calls to his attorneys. We are both physically and mentally worn out, and the only relief we have is when we see each other once a week. It's slowly killing our spirit and our bodies. The death penalty is so wrong on so many levels, and yet the powers that be see or feel none of that because they are on the outside looking in. Tom nor I may never see the day when these barbaric practices are abolished, but it's coming. So that's the most recent message from Leanne.
He's been, I believe, the longest serving person on death row in the country, because he has been incarcerated now since, what, 1974? Is that correct?
No, it's certainly over 40 years that he's been incarcerated.
Yeah, so.
He's certainly among the longest, that's for sure. We'd have to figure out exactly who is. Maybe he is. But certainly neck and neck with people like Tommy Ziegler in Florida. Let me share. Thank you both. Well, all three of you, Dave and Jan and Donna. I'll share just quickly that a couple of things that's been going on here. Here's some information about the legal stuff that's in process right now. In federal court, there's a clemency lawsuit, and this is kind of where things are due. As you can see, motions are due on the 22nd, which is coming. What is today? That's passed. But responses are due on the 30th, and we'll see a reply soon. There's a lethal injection litigation. There's also Gerald Pizzuto is the other person with active stuff. This is all the active litigation going on through the federal defenders in excuse me, in Idaho. And then I think the biggest thing, so you can see there's a lot going on, and we're not going to get into all of this here, but most notably is a request for a new clemency hearing. And that is to be heard and discussed and voted on this coming Tuesday. Possible this Tuesday that they may vote for a new clemency hearing, and if that does happen, then maybe it'll be set beyond the execution. It'll push this execution back. So we'll see that where that goes. I also want to share the webpage that we've launched for. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. This is the webpage for Idahoans Against the Death Penalty, which is currently fiscally a project of death penalty action, but it's basically being, it's a space for all the Idahoans to come together, and we've created several action opportunities. This image here is from the petition delivery that we did back in February, and the main thing that we have, the actions, in addition to the petitions, which are the death penalty action petitions, is a sign-on letter for people that are in leadership positions, whether you're a clergy person or an organization CEO or a board member or whatever it is. We're inviting people, Idahoans, people who live in Idaho or have a strong Idaho connection, to sign on to that. That's the top action there. There's some other ways for people to get involved, including having speakers and signing on as an organization. You can see we've got just a small list here, but others are adding themselves. And that's really the big work that we have to do over the next week or two, is beat the bushes and get many more endorsing organizations as well as petition signatures, so we're ready to do that. So it's a pretty basic site, but it's suddenly a portal for entry for people in Idaho to connect with this work. And then the other thing we mentioned earlier, Karen Hernandez, who is the bishop, the supervisor for the Sage District of the United Methodist Church, came up with an idea in our meeting last week, which I think the meeting was on Monday, or it was on Tuesday, right? And she said, let's invite people to add their voice. And she came up with a volunteer to put this all together using some footage from Death Penalty Action's People versus the Death Penalty series of videos, which many of you have seen already. In fact, Charles is here and Suzanne Bosmer is somewhere in the audience around here, and they're going to appear in this in a moment. But Ali, so this was created in time for it to be shown in churches around Idaho this weekend. And we're going to continue to push that out and give people the opportunity. And you'll see it's a way to in 3 minutes, have people see Idaho voices in leadership and invite people to get involved. Ali, let's run it.
I grew up on a small farm. There was a lot of Bible reading in front of the fireplace in the evenings. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was often used not just as a quote from the Bible, but it was an expression that we should use and believe in. And I did. I grew up supporting the death penalty simply because I thought it was the right thing. That's what I was told. That's what I believed.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
And when you look at the government, see, they're killing in the name of the church. And that's why we've taken our fight to the church. That's why we've asked the pastors to come out. This is wrong. It says, thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Do not kill in my name.
Don't kill in my name.
Don't kill in my name.
He was 42 days past his 19th birthday when he was arrested. So they arrested a child and they murdered a man.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Indeed, the death penalty can only be abolished when the bloodthirsty among us, the church, lose our addiction to death and murder.
Thou shalt not kill.
Execute justice, not people.
Execute justice, not people.
Execute justice, not people.
Why kill people? Who kill people? To show Americans that killing people is wrong.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
This is the letter that I received after Christopher's execution. It's down here. If you look closely, it says manner of death, homicide.
Thou shalt not kill.
Thou shalt not kill.
We must not allow this wicked system to shed any more blood in our names.
God gave us life. It's sacred. How can you take away anybody's life when you would not want that to happen to you also?
Thou shalt not kill.
Stop the death penalty now.
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 Stop the death penalty.
Now.
Now.
Now. Now. Now.
Stop the death penalty now.
End the death penalty now.
Stop the death penalty now.
I really don't want that feeling to go away. I want to remember that until my last breath. I want to remember it so I can tell it to people like you and to anybody else who will stand in front of me long enough to hear it. A premeditated ceremonial political killing. That's what I call it. This is much less than what we should be as Americans. Much less.
So as you could see, so that video is being shown in churches across Idaho already, and we're going to continue to push that. We're going to continue to push, like you saw the graphics that are now branded also for Idahoans against the death penalty. People are being invited to change their social media profile pictures to those or other things, or to take a picture of themselves with those graphics, and just giving people tools to be engaged in and to demonstrate in Idaho their opposition to the death penalty and what's happening. So, Donna, Jen, anything else we should add about what we're doing and how people can help?
Well, our church is going to have an information meeting next Sunday. Our pastor's in Washington, D.C. right now, but
office.
Guest of the Board of Church and Society of our Methodist Church. But next Sunday, we hope to have an information meeting after worship service, giving people as much information about the death penalty as we can, and then expecting all of us to agree to be one of the endorsing organizations to sign on to Idahoans Against the Death Penalty. But one thing that would be really, really helpful is a fact sheet, where, it costs more money. The death penalty costs more than non-capital cases, or sometimes innocent people are executed. Just one bullet after another on a fact sheet that could be handed out if we have an opportunity to talk to organizations, and it would just be additional information they could keep with them. I did learn that Washington and Oregon had a fairly recent study, I think it was 2017 and 2019, about the cost of capital punishment versus non-capital punishment. And it comes out, as you know, it's extremely more costly for a death penalty. This is something that really seems to surprise people when you first start the conversation. So as we know more about it, if you know anyone that's good at designing fact sheets, please let me know, but we'll be working on it in the meantime.
Sure. And we'll be here to help. Dave, you want to say anything about your work that you've been doing on the cost issue?
I'll just say something first. For those who don't know, we have 9 people on death row in Idaho, 8 men and 1 woman. And when you look at the amount that's being shoveled out to execute people, and look at the number of people that we have on death row here, is minimal compared to some other states. Surely we have a better use for our money than that.
Donna and the rest of the Idahoans Against the Death Penalty, I'll send out a fact sheet. It was put together by concerned conservatives.
Oh,
and it's very clear, it's very good. Secondly, I did some number crunching of my own, researching, just to confirm those statements about the expense of the death penalty here in Idaho versus what lifetime imprisonment would be. It's considerable. And so for the conservatives in Idaho who are concerned about the correct use of their tax dollars, this will be one of the major arguments that we need to make. I mean, just look at the $1.3 million they've spent to expand the death penalty chambers, that alone. Just as an aside, that amount of money, just the expansion money, not the additional amount necessary to keep the 9 prisoners on death row, but the expansion of the death chamber money would be enough to pay for the summer food program, 2 years of the summer food program, to over 12,000 needy kids here in Idaho.
Yeah.
Which our legislature refused to support the summer food program. which if you feed kids, they're going to be healthy. They're going to be able to learn, to stay in school, to avoid dropping through the holes in our society that can lead to, as we well know, to crime and increased violence and homicide. So
I thought
there's
that
that
contrast was the contrast between what we spend on the death penalty in Idaho and what we are not spending to fund food for children was a very impressive contrast there, Dave. So thank you very much for that.
There was a comment earlier, an observation earlier in this meeting about, one relationship at a time, which is not going to help us a lot with a scheduled execution 2 weeks from now, but in the long run. And my example that was very encouraging to both Dave and me, this morning, the doorbell rings. I go to the door, and it's our neighbors from across the pond whom we talked to a few months ago. And they were out walking, and they saw the sign in the window, because we've got one of the death penalty action signs in the window, and just wanted to come up and talk to us about that. And Dave said, "Oh, would you want a sign?" Yes. And so they continued their walk carrying this sign. And this is a retired couple, older retired couple. She used to do education classes in the prisons in California. And he was in law enforcement, and they're from the South. And I had brought it up hesitantly when we just met them on their patio last June. And right away, he spoke right up and he said, "I'm with you on that one." And you get support from places that you don't anticipate it. Because I was a little hesitant because I was wearing my Starving for Justice t-shirt when we were out walking. I finally stood up and turned around, let him read the back of it. And it was just like, yes.
That's why we provide these messaging tools, and that's why we all need to be using them. You never know who's going to see it and come and get involved. It sounds like those people should be recruited to be speakers.
And one other thing that I noticed in the last week is that the Idaho Statesman out of Boise, had a wonderful article against the death penalty, and they specifically named 3 people that had been sentenced to death that were found innocent.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 3 definite Idaho examples of innocent people that could have been executed, and fortunately were not.
Was that the article from the editorial board?
Yeah, I was going to say that wasn't an article. That was an editorial.
Yes, it was from the editorial board.
Opinion of, and is it safe to say the Idaho Statesman is sort of like the big newspaper in Idaho?
The major newspaper, I think. And it was the October 16th.
Yeah, that's on our social media, and we'll make sure that gets listed up on the webpage too. So we're way past the time that we normally go. I want to express my gratitude to all of you in Idaho. I'm hoping not to see you soon, but it may be that we have to come out or get to come out and help you, although y'all have everything you need to do it without us being there on the ground, but we're happy to come and be there with you. And we're going to sort that out soon. So any other questions, comments about Idaho? Jeff, did you want to add anything about Tom or anything else around that?
Not much, but I do like Tom. We've talked a number of times, and he's been somebody that I have sort of engaged on a peripheral level, I guess is the best way of saying it. He's not been one of the main guys that I've worked with, but somebody that I've been in touch with. And one of the things that I always think about when I think about these cases, obviously Tom's backstory, is pretty horrific in terms of how you talk about these cases or what people think about Tom. But I have found that, Tom's a nice guy. Like, there's no reason to kill him. And maybe, he's a nicer guy on death row than he would be in the, out in public. I don't know. But I do know that my experiences with him, my experiences with Leanne have been very cordial, very nice, and I just don't see. I think to me, the greatest argument against the death penalty is why. And I think that Tom is the quintessential example of what's the point? Why?
I'd like to just add one detail to our visit with Director Renke and the bishop and so on back in 2012. I later asked Brent Renke, why did you choose Tom Creech as the inmate to come out and talk to us? And he said, well, because I felt certain that he would be respectful, not use any foul language, and or get into any rage or anything like that. So even the director at that time thought that Tom could be trusted to be a nice person. And during the time we've been acquainted with Tom, I should add that he wrote poetry, he played the guitar, a well-rounded person as much as you could be on death row.
Don, I think I'll say this, Abe, and then we can wrap it up. But I was just going to say, you only know what you know. I mean, in terms of these cases, like I can't go back in time and, say this is exactly what happened, or this is exactly this, or this is exactly that. You only know what you know. And what I know of Tom is he's a really great guy. And, it sounds like, Donna, you've had that experience. And I know that a lot of other people who have interacted with him, he's incredibly respectful, very smart. And again, it's that question of what's the point? Why?
I'll tell you, I got an angry email from somebody on our list saying, well, because he's a serial killer. And of course, my reaction back to them is, so he hasn't killed anybody since he's been in prison. And it's not that I know of. And at the end of the day, what we know is that we don't need executions to hold people accountable to their crimes or to be safe from them. So I want to say a couple things. And first, I want to just lift up Ali Sullivan and Jeff Hurd as people who helped, came to me with the idea for this program, The Forecast, 2 years ago, just about. I think that was the first one. So we've been doing this pretty much monthly ever since. And just a bow of gratitude to Ali and Jeff for coming forward with that idea and being so faithfully part of it each time. I think you can all see that what we try to do is make sure to not just talk about the cases, but to humanize the people that are facing execution and to give voice to the people at the states that are fighting these at the state level. Whenever possible, the attorneys or the state leaders or other people that are involved in the struggle. Those are the voices that we try to lift up. So that's a big part of what the forecast is. And thank you, Ali, and thank you, Jeff, for helping create this and being a part of it all this time.
Ali is the brains behind all of this, all of it.
Okay, and there you have it. So Ali Sullivan, brava. And I also want to say, just before we go, you're going to see a lot more action opportunity around the federal death penalty, and specifically urging President Biden to commute all the death sentences just as soon as the election is over. That's when that would be when it makes sense to act. God willing, or however you want to frame that, it will be to take it off the plate of a President-elect Harris. This is me speaking personally. We, of course, do not endorse candidates, but we do talk about their policies. And what we know is that if a President-elect is Trump, then we're going to be getting ready for a lot of executions. That is his promise. That is our experience with him. That is why we want people to, if that's how you pick how you're going to vote, then vote accordingly. But ultimately, we have to get this opportunity of having a lame duck president to use the power that he has when it can't be used against him anymore to do the right thing. And I can guarantee you, I can tell you, last week I was on the phone with people from Congress, congressional staff, about what they're doing and what they're planning in that regard. We're going to see action from members of Congress. We're going to see action from others, leadership all across this country and from other countries, and it's going to be all hands on deck. We're also going to start talking about the moratorium resolution that comes up in the United Nations every other year. So this is one of those years, and our goal with that will be to get the United States to, at the very least, abstain from the vote. The United States always votes no on the resolution for a moratorium on executions, and if we could get them to abstain from that vote, that would be a big victory, or to change the vote and follow the position of this current administration. What they said last time, which was 2 years ago, they said that they had they had heard really a lot more than they ever had before from people about this issue. Former Maryland Governor O'Malley, who signed a bill to abolish the death penalty in Maryland, sort of became a de facto head of that campaign, and that's the messaging back that he got. So there's that. I also want to say that it's super exciting to see what happened with Robert Robertson in Texas. He's still alive, but under threat of another death warrant being set. And what's happening right now is a big fight between the legislature on one side and the governor and the attorney general on the other side. And what I also want to say about that is that we have to broaden that conversation. The reason that Robert Robertson was brought to was kept from being executed is because they wanted him to testify in a hearing about legislation passed in Texas over a decade ago that basically said, if the science that was used to convict you gets changed, then you get to have a rehearing on where that science stands today and how that would impact your case. Well, another guy with very similar circumstances got a stay from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, but Robert Robertson did not. And that was part of what they wanted to have the hearing on. But ultimately, what we saw is it doesn't matter how good your attorneys are, or if you have the resources of organizations like the Innocence Project, which is a multi-million-dollar a year organization, and all the other allies that were involved in that. All of us together failed to stop that execution in the courts or with the clemency process. It took the legislature doing something that had never been done before to stop that execution. And all that is to say that one of the things that's the reason we couldn't stop it is because of this thing called procedural bars. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but ultimately what that says is if you're past a certain point in your legal process, then you can no longer raise certain issues in certain ways. And we have seen, and we've begun to look for the cases. There are many of them. Just in 2023, at least, well, more than two, but the ones that I'm citing in an op-ed that I've drafted that we hope will be published soon are Arthur Brown, who came up with very late in the game evidence of his innocence and could not be heard in court because of procedural bars, and also another man in Texas who turns out the jury foreperson was using racist language in the jury room about this guy while he's on trial and while they're judging his life. That should have been heard in court too. And again, it was too little, too late to even have a hearing about it. That's the stuff we have to be talking about. In addition to all that, we want to expand that conversation, and Death Penalty Action is going to be doing that soon. So watch for that. And with that, are there any other comments or thoughts from anybody else on our panel? Allie, do we have a closing video? Maybe we can show the Idaho video.
I actually showed the Idaho video on opening. I can show it again, or we can do something else.
Let's show the Utah video then. And this is what we did in Utah not too long ago. And it's a good opportunity to say that we've had 4 states trying to resume, actually 5 if you count Kentucky, although they haven't really set a date yet, but 4 states that haven't done an execution in over a decade this year. Utah did it, South Carolina did it, Idaho's trying, and Indiana is going to try in December. So this is the work that we did in Utah to take us out. Hit it, Allie. Thank you.
Spending more than half of his life on death row, Taborn Honey is set to die by lethal injection.
But the worst thing about what this does to the victim families of the person who is murdered is ask them to prolong their healing process for decades. Wait till we kill the guy, then you'll feel better.
When I heard that Taborn Honey was going to be executed, I wanted to do everything that I could to save his life. I've been following death penalty action for about a year or so now, following other executions, signing petitions against other executions. And I reached out, and that first Zoom call found out that the current voice for anti-death penalty in Utah had become dormant, and we needed to reignite that.
When it became clear that Utah was about to carry out its first execution in 14 years, Death Penalty Action was invited to help elevate the voices of Utahns who oppose executions. With less than 1 week's notice, working with faith leaders, legal professionals, civil and human rights leaders, and others, Death Penalty Action helped local organizers create a series of public events worthy of media coverage, earning more than $1 million worth of mass media exposure for our message.
Capital punishment is an offense against the inviolability of life and the dignity of the human person, which does not render justice to the victims and their families, but rather fosters vengeance.
Conservatives are concerned about the death penalty because even when culpability is not in question, capital punishment is arbitrarily and unfairly administered by government.
And rather than spend $200,000 on a drug that, when used as prescribed here, is fatal, might that money be better used for restitution and healing?
We've got a few minutes for one-on-ones, and then we're going to gather. We're going to walk up the stairs and deliver our letter and our petition to the governor.
Share this with you. Thank you.
We are here outside of the prison, Utah prison, to give a voice for Taborn Honey.
I come all the way down here from Ohio, not to cry with you, but to try with you. Let's try to end this.
Everyday Utahns who saw our messages in the media were inspired to find and join the protests and come together as a new set of leaders for a newly invigorated state anti-death penalty organization. The death penalty is a failed government policy morally, economically, and socially, and is counter to the teachings of most faith traditions. Join us. Together, we can make the difference. Thanks, everybody. Make it a great week.